Like, pay attention. For thousands of years, we have been discussing the topic of religion completely wrong. All the structures of all the debates have been wrong. They have been ineffective. They have lacked any progress for that very reason. We need to address the philosophical foundations that uphold the structure of belief as a whole. That is the only way we can ever make progress in this topic. Ladies and gentlemen, I was at an art gallery tonight and I was having a conversation with someone there, a mutual friend of mine, about religion. And the conversation was just so stimulating to me intellectually that I could not resist the urge to leave the art gallery and come home immediately. I actually wasn't even at the art gallery. I was at my friend's house after the art gallery. And I was like, I have to get home. I have to get this down on a piece of paper, because I had a really big revelation. And I'm not going to sit here and say that no one's had a revelation like this before. This is probably, look, I haven't even researched this. I think, this might be an established thing, but I think people are thinking about the whole structure of religious debate wrong. I think they're doing it wrong. They're focusing on the wrong things. And I think I have the way here. And this is a revelation to me. It may not be a revelation to you, but I think I've realized finally, after years of looking into this, but specifically over the last year, that we have to approach religious debate from a philosophical perspective rather than from a theological perspective, right? And I'm going to elaborate on this. And I literally got home. It's 1 a.m. right now. The art gallery went on for a while, and I got home and I wrote down, various dot points here. I wrote down all these notes on this notepad, and I'm just going to go through them, right? Now, it's just dot points. It's just 2 pages of notes, literally. But I think we'll have a really interesting topic here. I think we'll have a really interesting podcast, and I'm excited to get the information out. I just hope I do it to a reasonable degree. I don't want to edit this. I don't want to cut anything. I want to keep this as authentic as possible. I'm trying my best, actually, to practice natural speech, right? When I do my YouTube videos for Wolves of Crypto, I don't sit there, I have a crypto channel. If you're watching this channel for the first time, I do cryptocurrency analysis videos. I don't script those videos, right? I go through the charts, obviously, and I get tabs up for the charts I want to discuss, but it's not something that I heavily script. I kind of just know what I want to say and I freestyle the video and I post it. I don't edit or anything like that, not usually. Unless the video is particularly important, I won't edit. And I think I want to get into the habit of doing that as well in long-form podcast content, because it's like a muscle, right? I mean, speaking in a freestyle format is a muscle you have to train. You can't just randomly start doing it. And so I'm not scripting these videos. And my AI video, my video I did 2 weeks ago on this channel, whether you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, I didn't really script that either. I knew what I was going to say and I said it, and it was a 50-minute video and I had very few cuts. I think I cut twice just to catch my breath, because speaking for a long time obviously can dry out the throat and things like that. And this is why this time, unlike last time, I'm prepared with a nice glass of water. So hopefully we won't have to do that. I'll take a sip now. But, right, let's get into it here. I'm discussing I'll start with this. I looked into religion very heavily last year, 2023. I was going through, quite traumatic events, I suppose, in my personal life, from an introspective level, from a perspective of, falling into nihilism, trying my best to fight against hedonism, which I've always known to be an endless void that you cannot fill. I've always been wise enough not to fall into the traps of hedonism too much. But also dealing with a health condition, and I won't disclose too much about it, but, I'm in my 20s. I'm a young male, and I haven't really had too much death in my personal life. I've been lucky enough to avoid funerals for the most part. I've obviously distant relatives and friends, family members of friends have passed away, and I'm obviously aware that death occurs, but having a health problem, my own health problem, really woke me up to the reality that, wow, okay, look, this is this is a finite life, and health is the number one priority, and nothing matters as much as health. And it made me, as it does with a lot of people when they're diagnosed with something, go into religion and study religion, right, intensely. Now, I'm an atheist, okay? I'm an atheist agnostic. Just going to cut that, in there just before you think I'm going into some sort of, religious revelation that I might have had. I didn't have that. But I tried very hard. I tried so hard to believe, right? And I'm doing 2 podcasts on this. My first one is right now. Today I'm discussing this, what I think to be, as of tonight, the ideal structure for you to have a religious debate. And in the next podcast, I'll discuss why I'm not a believer in God, and also what I think the pros and cons of religion are. But, when I looked into religion heavily last year, I was raised Christian. Okay, I'm very familiar with the church. I went to church every Sunday, went to church every holiday. Right, it was a very big thing in my household when I was younger, particularly. In my grandparents' household, it was a huge thing still. But I looked into not only Christianity, because I already know a lot about Christianity. I went to a Christian school as well, but I looked into the Quran, I looked into Islam, because Islam last year and this year particularly, I mean, you're probably aware, lots of influences, lots of people are in the online kind of sphere, I guess, are really favouring Islam right now. And I think my interpretation of that is that there's been a dramatic push in recent years, particularly after 2020, to the left politically. Right, a massive push towards woke ideology, and I think that Islam is kind of the most, the most opposite ideology that you could possibly have to wokeism. It is staunch. Okay, there's a big thing right now. You can't criticize Islam. Right, you have Charlie Hebdo writes a cartoon about Prophet Muhammad, depicts the Prophet Muhammad, which is haram, right, and gets gunned down in his office. Right, 7 employees gunned down, and this is a while ago, but it rings true to today. Criticizing Islam is not something that's allowed. You can. This is very common in the influencer space right now. You've probably heard it 50,000 times, but you walk outside with a shirt that says "I hate Jesus" and nothing happens. You walk around with a shirt saying "I hate Prophet Muhammad" and you get gunned down instantly, right? And it's virtually true. I mean, it might be a slight exaggeration, but it's virtually true. It's just not something you can criticize. And this is why I think we've seen a massive drift towards Islam. And so I looked at that last year and I thought, wow, this is interesting. So I looked into the Quran, I looked into Islam, and I didn't find anything that I like, right? I'm not going to sit here criticizing Islam. I think it's a dangerous game to play, for reasons I just listed, right? They're very staunch in defending their beliefs. But the point is, I didn't just look into Christianity. I read the Quran, I looked into Islam, I prayed. Right? I prayed by my bedside for weeks on end. Please give me a sign, right? Show me if you're real. Show me the truth here, right? Or just trying to pray as a meditative practice. I tried all of this. I tried it very hard, and I could not. I could not fall into it, right? So I'm just saying all this to point out this is not, religion's not a topic that I'm just randomly making a video on. It's something that I've thought about very, very deeply in the past for months on end. I've read the texts, right? I've lived as a Christian, and now I've decided, no, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm going to step away from the religion. I've been an atheist agnostic for many years now, right? Since my teenage years. But, with last year and with my interest in religion coming back as a topic of study rather than as something I believe in, I got really into religious debates. I started going through all the debates, that happened with the Four Horsemen. If you know, it's Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, okay, and Sam Harris, right? They're called the Four Horsemen, and they were basically at the forefront of the New Age atheist movement starting in the 2000s, right? The massive drift towards atheism in Western societies is partially attributed to them, and they're probably a symptom of it as well. But I mean, no doubt they've convinced, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of believers to drop their religion and come towards an atheist worldview, right? Whatever that may be, which is a massive problem in atheism, of course. And, I've been looking at these debates ever since last year, and I've been studying them, and I've been taking notes on them mentally and also physically. And I realized that a lot of these debates are just structured in such a poor format, right? There's just no way that going into these debates, you can almost certainly say that no one in these debates is going to change their mind, right? And this is what I think is true, and this is what I think a lot of people know is true. The Socrates, right, ancient Greek philosopher, his method of argument was a method that was less direct, a method that is called the Socratic method, which is basically guiding your opponent towards what you think is the truth through questions and raising questions within them rather than directly calling them out. Right? And obviously in the nature of a live debate, if you're talking about these debates that happen with Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, in the nature of a live debate, you're really playing to the audience and you want the gratification of the audience cheering and you getting that punchline in that can be used on a clip, right, that will go viral and all these kind of things. That actually, although it's very interesting to watch, it's almost like a sports game. It's almost like watching an MMA fight, really. Who's going to win? Who's going to battle? Who's going to, throw the best punch here? Intellectual punch. Although that's really interesting to watch, it's actually a terrible way to convince your opponent that you are correct. Right? The way to convince your opponent that you are correct is by structuring your argument effectively so that it raises questions within your opponent, right? It plants a seed within your opponent. You can't expect your opponent to shift their opinion while you're on stage with them or shift their opinion while you're discussing with them. And this is where I go back to the art gallery I was at tonight. And I was having a very interesting conversation about religion to a religious person. And I was questioning him. I was bringing up things from the Bible. I was bringing up things, inconsistencies. The Bible's been translated this many times, and the Dead Sea Scrolls had, some degrees of inaccuracies. And there's the Gnostic Gospels that were left out of the New Testament. There's Gospels that they just pick and choose and got out of there. The whole idea of the Trinity is not in the original book, right? All these kind of things. And we don't even know what the original book was to some extent, right? And I was realizing as I was doing this, there's no way that he's going to come out of this conversation with any doubt about his religious belief, right? And I was just thinking that I've done this wrong. By the middle of the conversation, I just realized I've done this whole thing wrong. I need to just back out of this conversation and rethink how I get into these, rethink my strategy here, right? If I want people to actually hear what I believe, right? They need to feel like they're coming to the conclusion themselves. People don't like losing, right? I think what I'm trying to do today is structure an argument and give you a format for not only debating people who are religious, but having religious debates in general. This is applicable to both sides. If you're a religious person watching this is a good basis, I think, to have debates in general about religion. And just before we get into the argument, I know I've been rambling here, I apologize for that. As I said, I'm freestyling this video. For the most part, I've got a few dot points here. I just want to discuss, when I talk about God, right, I'm not talking about the God that someone like Jordan Peterson is talking about, right? And what I mean by that is Jordan Peterson, very famous guy on the internet, very commonly talks about God. But, the thing I find really interesting about Jordan Peterson is, and this is going back to Sam Harris as well, Jordan Peterson had an 8-hour-long debate with Sam Harris across the course of 2 weeks in various cities across the globe, okay, about religion. And he was on the side defending religious belief, and Sam Harris was trying to convince him that no, religious belief is not relevant, right? It's not necessary. And by the end of the 8-hour debate, we as the audience members still don't know what Jordan thinks about religion. Right? We still don't know if Jordan Peterson actually believes in God. Right? He says he does, but he says it in such a symbolic, such a metaphorical sense. And when you try to pin him down on what he actually thinks, Jordan, was Jesus born of a virgin? Jordan, did Jesus actually get resurrected, actually rise from the dead? Jordan, was Jesus actually the Son of God? As soon as you ask those kind of questions, he just goes down an endless loophole of metaphor, an endless, portal of allegory. And the more you chase him, the more you realize he can keep doing this forever and you will never get a straight answer out of him. Jordan Peterson is someone who's been talking about religion for years, and not one single time has anyone got an actual straight answer out of him. Right? So it's my belief, personally, and we can't even clarify this, we can't even know if this is true because he just refuses to say that Jordan is not a believer in God, right? He's a believer in some kind of metaphorical thing that he calls God, but he's not a believer in the literal God that is in the Bible, right? The literal God that was Jesus, that was born of a virgin, that rose from the dead. He doesn't actually believe those things literally happened, right? If you put a camcorder in front of Mother Mary at the moment of the conception of Jesus in her womb, you would not find a man having intercourse with her, right? And like that's what I mean. Like if you ask Jordan that question, like, you know, if I put a camcorder in front of Mother Mary at the moment of Jesus' conception, would I find a man having intercourse with her, or was she actually born of a virgin? I mean, he wouldn't answer that question, but I assume what he actually means is no, right? I assume he's just talking about God in a metaphorical sense. I assume, to an extent, he's also kind of leading on his audience a little bit, because the more vague he keeps his conversations about religion, the more he attracts a religious audience, right? And he kind of gives them just enough that they stick around, but never actually fully clarifies his belief, because he knows that if he fully clarifies his belief, potentially his audience will drift away, right? Maybe that's a part of it. I'm not trying to criticize his integrity or anything like that. I'm sure, I've really got no idea, but that's just maybe a part of it, a small part of it at least. But what is for sure, and this is something that he will agree with if he was speaking on camera right now, I'm sure he would, is that his religious beliefs are not clear, and they're certainly not conventional. So that's not the kind of religion I'm talking about. That's not the kind of God I'm talking about today. The kind of God I'm talking about is the literal God, right? I'm also not talking about people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was a famous atheist, right? On the same echelon, on the same tier as Richard Dawkins. A fully famous atheist, wrote 4 or 5 books against religion, right, for decades. And now, in recent years, has come out and said, no, I'm a believer in God now. And when she's questioned about it by Richard Dawkins, she says, oh, I choose to believe in God. Like, I choose to believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. And I'm just sitting there thinking when I'm watching this, how can you choose to believe something? To me, that doesn't make sense. Like, and perhaps I'm just not smart enough to understand it, but to me, you cannot choose to believe something. You either believe it or you don't. Right? If I go outside and I see that the sky is blue, and all the scientific evidence says the sky is blue, and everyone around me says the sky is blue, but I say that I choose to believe the sky is green, right? That doesn't mean I actually believe the sky is green. It just means I'm trying to convince myself that it is, but I actually know it's not. So to me, Ayaan Hirsi Ali's position about choosing to believe in God, which is actually a very growing position, surprisingly, amongst people who just want to be religious. Like, people want to be religious. I want to be religious. I'd love to be religious. It would give me so much clarity on so many things. But I think a lot of people actually just want to be religious so badly that they convince themselves that they believe in something when they actually do not when push comes to shove. That's not the kind of religion I'm talking about either. I'm talking about actual religion. Call it conventional belief, call it whatever. Actual religion. This is what I'm talking about today. Right. So now that we've kind of cleared that up, right, I want to get into my kind of revelation I've had tonight, about how we should be having religious debates. And I think it's the most clear way to have religious debates as an atheist and as a believer. Let's get into it. Let me just have a drink real quick here, and then we'll dive right into it. Right, so here's where we get into how to best structure a religious debate, in my opinion, based on what I've learnt over the past year, but specifically what I came to realize tonight when I had that kind of faulty debate with that individual at the art gallery, which is really quite a funny place to have a religious debate. I mean, you wouldn't think that many people there would believe in God, but I was proven wrong tonight, which is always interesting. And I love exposing myself to new environments like that, because you learn that people are much more nuanced than you think, right? Which is really interesting, actually. Right, but how do we best structure a religious debate? And I may talk a lot when I speak about this from the atheistic perspective, okay? But I want you to know that this works for a religious person as well. Right, step 1 about arguing about religion with someone. Do not dwell on the actual text themselves. Do not dwell on what you deem to be the moralities or immoralities of what happened in the Old Testament, or what you deem to be immoral about what happened in the Quran, right? Whether you think the plague that killed all these people, this entire civilization of Canaanites, whether you think that plague was wrong or right, whether you think the passages, the extended passages in the Bible discussing how to best own slaves, right? Whether you think that is moral or immoral, whether you think the marriage of Aisha to the Prophet Muhammad at the age of 6 and the consummation of the marriage at the age of 9 when he was 50 years old, consummating the marriage for a 9-year-old, whether you think that's right or wrong, it actually doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. You're not going to convince a religious person that they are wrong about their faith because you bring up something that you deem to be immoral from the text. Because the reality is, these people believe in the text regardless of what you bring up from the text. They believe in God already. Anything in the text they take with their belief, okay? Very, very interesting conversation between Sneeko and Ali Dawar. Okay, Ali Dawar, might be mispronouncing his last name potentially, is a very popular YouTuber. Sneeko is a very popular YouTuber as well. And they're both Muslims. Sneeko's a more recent Muslim. He's new to the faith, right? So he's learning about Islam. And there was a question that was asked, and the question was, would you rather have a homosexual son or a Christian son? And Sneeko said, he answered first, and he said, I'd much rather have a Christian son, because me being a Muslim and him being a Christian, we'd have a lot in common. We both believe in God. We both believe in divine intervention. We both believe in certainly a whole swath of political beliefs, one of them being abortion. Okay, we believe in all of these things. We believe in community. We both go and worship and pray. We both fear a higher power. There's lots of similarities between a Christian and a Muslim. So Sneeko said, I'd much rather have a Christian son than a homosexual son. And that sounds completely logical to an atheist, right? But then Ali Dawar said, no, you're wrong. You're wrong, Sneeko. That is the incorrect answer, right? And he said it is the objectively incorrect answer. That's what he said. He said it is much better to have a homosexual son than it is to have a Christian son, because in Islam, right, Allah says that apostasy, right, the worshipping of a false god, is the highest sin. Okay, there's no questions about it. There's no if, buts, and ands. And Sneeko tried to push back a little bit, but then soon after he realized that he was completely correct. Right? God said that apostasy was the highest sin. God said that Christians are bad. They're doing a bad thing, right? They're sinning. It's haram, right? Being homosexual is not haram. Engaging in homosexual acts is haram, but being homosexual itself is not haram. But even if the homosexual son you had was engaging in homosexual acts, that would still be less sinful than being a Christian, right? God said that being Christian is the worst thing, that being an apostate is the worst thing, therefore it is the worst thing, therefore regardless of the logical sequences that follow about how you would rather have a Christian son because they're similar to you and they share a lot of traits from you, regardless of your stupid human brain and your stupid human belief processes, regardless of any of that, God is the arbiter of truth. He knows what's best. When he says that apostasy is the highest sin, you cannot debate that. Right? Your mind is feeble in comparison to his. You look at John verse 3, chapter 16, right? I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to God in heaven except through me. Right? You looked at later in John, something similar is said in Isaiah. I can't remember the chapter or the verse, but it basically says that Jesus is the arbiter of truth. God is the truth. Okay? Right? So this is the problem fundamentally with having arguments, whether you're a religious person or you're an atheist person, about the actual texts themselves and the things described in the text and the history. Right? You can't argue with a religious person about how a certain thing was immoral by our standards, certain thing was immoral because look, this is how it makes sense from a human, because they don't care about your human thought process. They don't care about your human reasoning. If they believe in God and God said something, that trumps everything else, no matter even if they agree with you. Right? This is it's such an interesting thing about the conversation with Sneeko and Ali Dawar, right? Ali Dawar agreed with Sneeko, but he said, I agree with you, but that's my human mind speaking. And my religious mind and the fact that I'm devoted to Allah, I know that I know what is correct, and it's what God thinks, not what I think. It was so interesting. It was such an interesting dichotomy there between the trusting his own kind of thought processes and trusting the thought processes of his God that he believes is real, of course. So that's step one, right? And there's two more things to discuss, right? And then we'll conclude. But step one is you cannot have a religious debate, an effective religious debate. Now, you might be able to bring the audience members who are on the fence over to your side, but you're not going to convince a devout religious person they are wrong about their faith by bringing up things from the Bible or the Quran that you disagree with, right? It just doesn't work because God said it's true, therefore it's true, right? Right, okay. Now just to expand on that a little bit more, you might be able to argue that the text themselves is unreliable, right? You might be able to argue that, it's been translated so many times, there's been decrees in the past to ban certain gospels or to ban certain versions of the Quran. And by the way, yes, certain versions of the Quran were banned, okay? A few hundred years after Prophet Muhammad lived, there was a decree to burn and get rid of all versions of the Quran except for the one that they deemed to be the proper one. So although it's much less edited and altered than the Bible, it is edited and altered from its original state to some extent. We don't know what that extent is. So you can make arguments for that, but even then, a religious person could say that, well, via divine intervention, God would never have let his text and his word be diluted massively. So, if they believe in God, they're just going to believe that God prevented it from being altered too much. And what we have right now is a suitable version in God's view. So it's another obsolete argument. So again, just to clarify, you cannot argue with a religious person about what you deem to be wrong in the Bible and convince them that they are wrong. It just doesn't make sense, right? To them, God is the truth, God is the way, God is the life. Anything you say is incorrect. Anything even they think in their human head is wrong, right? So that's step one. Okay. Step two is the cosmological argument. Right, so you may think, right, okay, well, I can't convince this religious person that they are wrong about their belief in God through the text itself and through things in the text that I deem to be wrong. So what if I try convincing them that God isn't real from a cosmological argument, right? What if I try and tell them about the Big Bang? What if I try to tell them about astronomy and all these things? And this argument is just so easily not going to work. And the reason is, right, this is going to be a very short-lived segment here. The reason is we actually can't prove that God isn't real from a scientific perspective. We really don't know where the universe came from. Big Bang's a theory. It is actually a theory that's actively debated, even amongst scientists. And quite frankly, the religious argument here is quite good, right? It's everything that we know about this universe is cause and effect, right? Everything has cause and effect. And if you go back in the chain of cause and effect long enough, eventually you have to come to an original cause. And so the religious people would say that original cause is God. And if you say, okay, well, what came before God then? That's actually an invalid question from a logical perspective. You can't really ask what came before God, because in this argument, logically, God is posed to be the original cause of everything, the original point of causation. So asking what comes before that is illogical, it doesn't make sense. But then the atheist can say, okay, well, the Big Bang's the original cause. The Big Bang is the original causation. And then the religious person will say, oh, well, what came before the Big Bang? And just like how we can't say, what came before God, because it's an invalid question, you actually can't even ask what came before the Big Bang, because again, it's an invalid question. So, I mean, this whole cosmological argument is just a grey area. We don't know. We just do not know. And we can't definitively disprove God's existence. We can't definitively prove that the universe came about from natural processes. We don't know how the universe began. So it's an argument that's just going to lead to a dead end every single time. It's a very simple argument from both perspectives. So yeah, the cosmological argument, you just throw it in the bin. It's not worth even discussing. It's not worth even bringing up. If you're unintelligent, if you're not educated about the topic, you can fall into the trap of being convinced you can fall into the trap of being convinced from, religious people to be religious through the cosmological argument, because they can bring up this whole cause and effect thing. If you don't think about it critically enough, you will be like, oh yeah, true, God's real. Right, so I think it's a grey area argument. I don't think it's something we should be focusing too much on. Okay, so now we've gone through two kind of arguments here that I think are completely wrong. And these are two arguments that I've experienced in my personal life, and I know for a fact that people dwell on way too much. The cosmological argument is a waste of time, completely a waste of time. There's no conclusion there that can be had. It hasn't changed for hundreds of years. And the argument of looking into the actual events that occur within the texts and the actual history, right, of religion, I think you're going to have a very hard time making progress there. Right, so how do I pose that you have a religious argument? And this applies to atheists and it applies to religious people. Right. The only way, in my view, to debate the existence of God with any expectation of progress is to raise questions about philosophy. Right? What am I talking about when I talk about philosophy? I'm talking about materialism, I'm talking about free will, and I'm talking about good and evil, right? Morality. Materialism, free will, and morality. Now, by addressing the underlying philosophical arguments, right, you can erode the philosophical foundation that belief is built on. You can't be a Christian if you do not believe in free will. You can't be a Christian if you believe that good and evil can spring up from reason and science. You can't be a Christian if you believe in materialism and you believe that you do not have a soul. Right? These are the things we need to be focusing on because these are the things that have the least amount of emotional attachment to them. These are the things that cannot be brushed off easily by saying, oh, God said it's real, God said it's true, therefore it's true. Now, if you convince someone, which I think you can do very easily actually, I don't think that the dualistic argument, I don't think the argument that we have a soul is very strong. I don't think the argument that we have free will is very strong. I'm going to be discussing all these things in the next podcast. If you can convince someone that, and or at least give reasonable doubt. And this is where the Socratic method comes in, right? Raising questions, planting seeds in their head, right? Even if they won't agree with you at the time, if you can give enough of a compelling case for why free will does not exist, for why everything's determined, right? If you can give enough of a compelling case for why we don't have a soul, right? Enough of a compelling case for why consciousness arises from physical processes, not from a soul. If you can give a compelling case for why good and evil springs about from reason and science, not through the objective truth that is enlightened upon humans as God, from God. If you can give a case for any of these things and they even believe in one of them, the entire foundation for their religious belief collapses. Okay? You don't need to convince them of all three. You may disagree that you can find objective morality through reason and science. You may disagree that free will is not real. But you may agree that everything is material and we don't have a soul. And even then, there you go. Your religious belief falls apart. Right? In order to be religious, it is absolutely necessary. It's just mandatory that you believe in free will, that you believe that we are dualistic beings with a physical body and a spiritual body, a soul. And it is mandatory that you believe that good and evil can only be objectively found through the Word of God. If one of those three beliefs falls apart from a philosophical perspective, the entire foundation of the structure that is your belief falls apart and crumbles. This is how we need to be having religious debate. And by the way, this isn't just true from the atheistic perspective, right? If you're a religious person, you can argue that, free will is real. You can argue that dualism is real. We have a soul. And you can argue that the only way we can find objective morality is through God, and therefore you will have potentially planted the seed for an atheist to start believing in God. So it works both ways. But I think this is the battleground that religious debate needs to take place on. This is an effective battleground. It's like you're never going to pierce through the armor of a religious believer by looking into the texts themselves. I realized this tonight. When I was at the art gallery and I was discussing religion, I was discussing the texts, I was discussing why is slavery justified in the Bible? Why does God, right? This guy who's meant to be, this being who's meant to be the arbiter of morality, he knows exactly what's good, exactly what's bad. Why is he saying that there is a correct way to have slaves? Right, when I was talking to this guy at the art gallery about this, and when I heard his responses, I just so quickly realized, this is such a bad way to have this debate. What I should have done, and what I will do from now on, I should have gone right to the root problems, right? Why is he a believer in the first place? He's a believer because he believes in free will. He's a believer because he believes in a spiritual realm of some sort. He's a believer because he believes the only way you can find good and evil is through God. He's not a believer because he read the Bible and it resonated with him. Or maybe he is, right? Maybe he is. Maybe he did have a spiritual experience, right? Maybe that's why he did come to God. Maybe he prayed and he thought that his prayers were answered, right? But even then, the way to pull him out of that is to attack the core philosophical beliefs that underpin the entire structure of belief itself, which is free will, morality, and materialism, okay? Those are the things that need to be focused on when you're talking to a religious person or when you're talking to an atheist as a religious person, right? And I think that's really the way to do it. I think that's what I'll be doing from now on. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm not really sure how to wrap it up smoothly. I think I've got all my points out. But yeah, that's what I'll be doing from now on. And in my next podcast, just shut the book there. In my next podcast, I will be discussing my beliefs, right? Why I'm not a believer in God, and I will be doing it from the layout of argument that I just set there. I just want to address something quickly that I noticed in the editing process here. I don't think that you can't be a religious person if you don't believe in free will. I don't think that you can't be a religious person if you don't believe that objective morality can come through science. I don't believe that you can't be a religious person if you don't believe in the soul. I just think it's very difficult to do so from any conventional religious standpoint, which is what most religious people hold. I think raising questions about the existence of free will or the non-existence of free will is going to do a lot more to convince a religious person they're potentially wrong about their belief than questioning certain things in the Bible and questioning the legitimacy of a text, etc. Because those are things that they've probably already addressed internally. They're very common points. And they're things that they already have answers to, right? Answers that you can just you can just brush that off. Oh, it's divine intervention. God ensured that if it was going to get altered too much, it wouldn't have happened. Oh, you can go down these rabbit holes. God would never do anything bad. Therefore, anything you deem to be bad in the Bible is not actually bad. You're just wrong, right? The only things that you can actually attack and make progress on, in my view, are these philosophical arguments, these philosophical points, right? These free will, this determinism, and objective morality. And objective morality is probably the least likely thing to lead to any change in someone's views, but it still is part of the process of planting seeds. In my view, the free will argument is really what's going to convert the most people over to your side if you are a religious person or if you are an atheist debating that topic. I think that free will is massively important when it comes to the topic of religion. If you don't have free will, you don't have agency of your actions. If you don't have agency of your actions, you can't effectively choose whether you sin or whether you act in a way that is halal or whether you act in a way that is good in relation to what God wants you to do. So I think there are big questions to be asked here. And I think it's much more effective than asking the conventional questions about the book itself or actions within the book. So that's what I think, guys. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you for watching. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in my next video. Appreciate you guys. Cheers.